Hello, everyone. My name is Miss Amber. For those of you who are unfamiliar with me and my giant headphones, I am one of the tutors for MVA and Step Up. And today in this video, we're going to explore an overview of our elective courses. We're going to go through each of the items and discuss how the classes are structured and how they work. So let's get into it without any delay. I am just going to pull up and share my screen here. And this is one of our electives. This is culinary arts. Not every single elective that you take is going to be culinary arts related. This is just the example class that we are going to use to go through the different pieces and see how things are structured, what you can do, what the lessons are like. And we want you to be as prepared as possible to go through these classes and be able to complete them easily. So we're going to start with an overview of just what is in a class, right? Just a general description. Now, our classes are made up of information that you can open up at the beginning. You can see that there's this list here. And then we have units. Each class has its own number of units. I believe that culinary arts has, 5. Um, and the way that our classes are structured is there's a certain number of lessons in each unit, and then there's a certain number of units in each class. So we're just gonna go ahead and show off just all of the units at once. You can see that there's 5 here. We have a midpoint check-in, which is exactly what it sounds like. You're going to check in with a staff member, or they'll check in with you once you get to the middle or a little bit past the middle of the class. And then there's a space for you to turn in notes when you get close to the end. There's a discussion-based assessment, and we'll get into what you do for that a bit later. We have a study guide for the final for you guys down here, and then the end of semester test. Now to get into just a little more detail here about the units, they are comprised of the lessons that you'll be going over. These are called tutorials. And then after each tutorial, there is a 5-question quiz called mastery tests. We have one of these for every single lesson. And then when you get to the end of the post-test, when you get to the end of the unit, there is a post-test. Now, not every single elective has a post-test at the end. It depends on what elective, but most of them do have post-tests. The post-test is basically a big quiz that has questions from every lesson in the unit. So this Unit 1 post-test has questions from the first, second, and third lessons in Unit 1. And it's the same way for Unit 2, Unit 3, Unit 4, and Unit 5. An important thing to remember is that if you're a student and you log in, make sure that things are expanded. Sometimes your interface will look a little bit different than this, but it will have pretty much the same layout. Sometimes students will see the folder or the section for Unit 1 or 2, and when they look at it, they don't realize that they can click on it and expand it, so they end up skipping to the next unit. You should absolutely make sure that you're clicking the little plus button next to your unit to expand it so you can see all the lessons. There's no such thing as a unit that doesn't have any lessons in it. So if you see the header for your unit, Unit 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, and you don't see any lessons underneath it, that means that it's closed and you need to open it up. Okay, so that's pretty much the overlook of what the courses are like. We have information about the class in the beginning. We have things that you have to wrap up to turn in and finish at the end before you have the semester test. And then in between, you have your lessons, your tutorials, your mastery tests, and your post tests. So now that we've done the overview, I'm going to take some time. We're going to go over each of these um, documents that you can open at the top. And then we're going to go a little bit more in depth to the lessons so that you can see what they look like when you open them. And then we'll explain some of these things here at the end in a little more detail as well. Now, if you are a step-up student, there may be a couple of these items that are missing from your course. I believe that step-up students may not have midpoint check-ins. It honestly depends on the course and the program that you're in. But this is a full class that has everything included. So we're just going to go over this so that you have the idea of what could be in your class. If you have all of these things in your class, great. You will know exactly what they are. If any of these things are missing from your course, then it just means that in the program that you are in, you don't have to deal with that particular assignment, or you don't have to, you don't need that information. So starting from the top, we have the intro video, which is basically what you're looking at right now. It's an overview of the elective courses and what's in them. Next, we have the syllabus. I'm going to open this up, but we're not going to spend very long on it. The syllabus pretty much gives you a list of all of the assignments in the course and gives you a brief explanation of everything that you're going to learn from the class while you are taking it. So here, basically, it tells you pretty plainly, it's a 1-semester course that's intended to help you gain an understanding of the history and development of culinary arts. And then there's a list here that tells you what the goals are. These goals correlate or are related directly to what the course is going to teach you. This is basically a summary of information you're going to get while you're going through the course. And then underneath that, we have the list of the assignments that are here. So this is just a big list of all of the units, all of the assignments, and what their names are. So if you just want a one-stop shop list to show your parent or something like that, this will be the document that you would open. Next, we have course completion requirements. This is a list of the requirements in our program for you to have the final open so you can complete the class. You cannot complete the class and earn a credit if you do not fulfill these requirements. So we let you know upfront what they are. And I'm going to go ahead and open it up and we'll go over it. Now, this starts off telling you at the very top, in order to unlock your EOS, that's your end of semester test, students must. And that means that if these are not complete, your final will not be open. You have to complete each of these things. So going down the list, it says here, open and complete all tutorials with an appropriate amount of time in the class. You have to have 15 minutes in each tutorial, and they all have to be completed. You can't start a tutorial, only go halfway, take the test, and then just keep going. They will not open the final or the end of semester test for you. If the circle, there's usually a circle by your assignment. If it is not filled in completely blue to show that it's complete, if it's only half filled in and you haven't gone through every single slide to the end, we will go back and ask you. It says here that there's a minimum of 15 minutes in each tutorial. We can see the time that you have spent in each tutorial. So if you don't have 15 minutes in it, we'll ask you to go and spend the extra time in the lesson. If you are going through the material, reading it the way you should, and taking notes, you should have no problem with getting 15 minutes in each tutorial. The next item here is that you have to have the required overall time in the class. So you have to have 5 hours, at least 5 hours total in your elective course. That basically means that when we add up the time that you spent in every tutorial and every test and every assignment, you should have at least 5 hours in the class. If you are under 5 hours, if you're rushing through the course, first of all, your grade is less likely to actually be passing if you're rushing through the course, but also your advocate or mentor will ask you to go back in the class. So to avoid that, actually just make sure that you're spending time opening and reading through everything, asking questions, completing the assignments and everything. The next item is you have to attempt to work in each tutorial and the mastery test or post-test at least once to receive help from a tutor. Now, this is kind of a no-brainer. If you have not opened up a lesson or looked at the questions from the mastery test and tried to take it, it's hard for staff to know what it is you're not understanding and what it is that you can need help with. It's one thing to have a hard time finishing a tutorial, like maybe you get stuck on a specific slide or a piece of information doesn't make sense to you and you don't want to continue until it does make sense. But if you are asking for tutoring or help with an assignment that you have not opened at all, you will have to at least attempt to go through the lesson yourself before we allow you to sign up for tutoring. A tutor will, in fact, ask you, what is it that you're having trouble with? What section of this lesson, what idea or topic do you not understand? Because if you don't know what you need help with, the tutors will have a hard time helping you too. Down here, the next item, we have students must complete the midpoint check-in as well as the discussion-based assessment questions with their teacher, mentor, or advocate. So these midpoint check-ins and the discussion-based assessment are basically small conversations that you have with your advocate or your mentor or teacher that basically just prove that you've actually opened up the course and gone through it. This is basically to deter cheating or anyone just looking up the answers and copy and pasting things when they're going through the assignments. Um, your advocate, mentor, or teacher is just going to ask you a couple questions about things that you've learned in the course to prove that you actually have been looking at the lessons with your eyeballs and know some information based on what you've learned. The discussion-based assessment is the one at the end of the course, and there are specific questions that you have to answer for that one. The midpoint check-in, your advocate or teacher or mentor will choose the questions and discussions themselves. The next item here is sending notes. You have to turn in notes to get credit for these classes. So the core courses that we have, English, math, science, and social studies, usually have guided notes available. Not all of our electives have guided notes. For those of you who do not know, the guided notes are basically worksheets that have fill in the blank areas for you to write in information from the tutorials. Because not every single elective class has those, the alternative is for you to handwrite your notes. Now it says here that you can turn in 10 pages of guided notes for core classes or 5 pages. But we're talking about electives, so we're going to move on to the next one. It says here 3 pages of handwritten notes in the elective classes. So if you are in an elective course like this one, culinary arts, and that course that you're in does not have any guided notes, first of all, your advocate will tell you, you will know. And then you will just have to take photos of your handwritten notes throughout the class and then send them via Edmentum and Genius to your advocate, mentor, or teacher. Now for electives, it says here 3 pages of handwritten notes. Honestly, the elective courses have a lot of information in them, and it should not be hard at all for you to get 3 pages of information in your notes for elective courses. Now, there's a couple of things of note here. It says here screenshots and copy pasted notes are not accepted. So you cannot turn in screenshots and you cannot turn in anything that is typed up. If you are a student that types really quickly, or usually you do your notes online, you will have to copy down some of the things you've decided to put in your digital notes onto paper so that you can turn it in. And then the notes must be relevant to the course. So we are going to be reading what you send us to make sure that you're not turning in notes from another class to cover this one. So if we see that your notes are not related to the course that you were enrolled in, we will send them back and ask you to resubmit them. The next thing for the EOS to have the end of semester test unlocked is you have to have a 65% or higher overall in the course before we unlock the final. So the 65 is the minimum grade that you can have in the course before the final exam is unlocked. If you do not have a 65, you will have to go back and retake some of those lessons, retake some of those tests, and perhaps get tutoring to help with bettering your score so that you can have the final unlocked. Now we've got a couple of important points down here as well, which are the overall grade that you need on the test and in the class altogether to pass. So when you take the final exam, it's going to have questions from every single lesson and unit in that elective course. And you have to score at least a 50% on your end of semester exam or final to pass the class. Again, just like with your overall grade before unlocking the EOS, if you have less than a 50% on your EOS or final, you will be asked to retake the final. And this is why it says, please contact your teacher, advocate, or mentor if you score less than 50% on your final. And then it says the overall grade must be 60% or higher to be granted credit. So once you take the EOS, your final exam, and you've completed all your assignments, your grade in the class overall with everything completed has to be at least a 60%. The exception here in bold is if you are a student from our Westwood district. If that is the case, you have to have an overall grade of 70% or higher to get credit in the class. That means that if you complete your final exam and say you had like a really rough time in units 1 or unit 2 of your class, and your overall grade is a 58, is a 55, you will have to redo some of those assignments with help if necessary to attempt to explain concepts and go over the material so that you can bring your overall grade up to at least a 60. We cannot close out the class and give you another class and award you that credit if the overall grade in the class, once everything is said and done, is not at least a 60 or a 70 if you're a Westwood student. I believe that is all of the requirements, so I'll close this out. Next, we have a sheet on plagiarism. Plagiarism is important, not just because you're in high school in general, although it is, but also because there are questions and assignments in this course and in some of the other electives too, where you have to write out your answers. So once you open this up, we give you a definition of plagiarism. Plagiarism is when you use someone else's words or ideas and pass them off as your own. So it's basically stealing. That's pretty much what it is. It's when you're trying to pass off something that you didn't write or come up with as if you wrote it or came up with it. So it says here, think about how pirating music is considered stealing. Plagiarism is like pirating someone else's words and ideas to use in your own writing. You do not get credit for finding someone else's idea that they worked hard to develop and think of. You're allowed to quote someone else's idea if you think it is a good idea or if you want to bring it to the attention of your teacher while you're answering an assignment or a question. If you feel like someone else's ideas make sense, it can help you with figuring out your own thoughts on something. You can quote it, you can reference it. But what stops something from being plagiarism is when you actually tell us the source, right? So here we have a list of all of these things that are considered plagiarism. Turning in someone else's work as your own, that's kind of a no-brainer. Copying words or ideas from someone else without giving credit, that's the literal definition of plagiarism. We have failing to put a quotation in quotation marks. So if you're quoting someone else as having said something, you have to note who said this. Otherwise, it looks like you said it, and that's an issue. We have giving incorrect information about the source of a quotation. So you have to actually tell us the correct person that we could look up on our own if we were to go and check behind you. We have changing words, but copying the sentence structure of a source without giving credit. So if you change 1 or 2 words, but the whole rest of the sentence is the same, you're still taking someone else's idea. It's not just the words you use or what order they're in, it's also the idea. if some people did a study that gave us an important piece of information, you can't tell us that information without telling us who did the work to get it, right? If you interview, like a famous singer, and you take something that they said and write about it as if you were the person who said it, it's pretty much the same principle here. Even if you change one or two words, the idea is theirs. You can't pretend that you were the person who came up with the idea. And then the last one is copying so many words or ideas from a source that it makes up the majority of your work, whether you give credit or not. And that means when we're having you answer questions in these tutorials, in these lessons, we want your actual thoughts, not someone else's thoughts. If you are learning from something that you've read or done research on, you can tell us, oh, in this article, so-and-so says that this problem can be solved by, blank X, Y, or Z. Or if you look up information that says, according to a study that this other group has done, here's a fact that's important to answering this question, right? Those things are great. It's good to include that information, but we need to know who came up with that idea first, who did the legwork, the studying, right? Who actually did the hard work to have the idea or to prove the fact or to actually say the idea or the concept. Now here we have at the bottom, we have the actual source of this list. This is from plagiarism.com. What is plagiarism, right? And this is also a link that opens up, right? So, oh, whoops, I closed that by accident. Let me open it back up. Yes. So this paragraph down here says, notice what I did there. I got the above information from a plagiarism website. I added the source, see that web address, and that's the website where I got the information. So this is an example itself of actually giving credit to the ideas. These words came from the website here. This was not something that our staff came up with. There's an official definition for plagiarism, and we are quoting that here in the article and telling you where it came from so that you know that we've done research on what plagiarism is and what everyone agrees it is. So we're not just making something up. This isn't something that we just came up with to make students' lives harder, right? This is actually what plagiarism is, and these are the rules for how to identify it. It says here, if I didn't add the source, it will look like I wrote that bulleted list myself. It will look like our school wrote it, right? But by adding the source, you know that that's not something that we came up with by ourselves. But I didn't come up with it on my own. It was already written by someone else. If I didn't tell you where I got that information, it would be considered plagiarism. So we get further information on what it is here. Here's a short list of tips to avoid plagiarism. It includes using your own words, stating your sources, and coming up with your own thoughts and ideas about it. I know that sometimes that last one is hard, especially when you're going through a class and you're having a hard time connecting with the material. But the point of school is to sort of train you how to look at things and think about what you're learning. So you're going to have to put a little bit of elbow grease into trying to come up with your own original thoughts about whatever question it is you're answering or whatever it is you're trying to tell us about for an assignment. And lastly, we have tutoring information. This is a document that has contact information and scheduling information for our tutors. I am one of the tutors for elective courses, me, Miss Amber. You can see me right here. I'm under Miss Stokely. And these are links to our Calendly pages. If you open up any of these links, it will take you to the Calendly website where you can sign up for a tutoring slot. So you'll see a page that looks something like this. Sometimes you'll be able to select time slots first. So I'll open this one up. This one's mine. I have different time slots for different things that students need. So we've got 90 minutes for finals and things like that, 60 minutes for normal tutoring sessions, 30 minutes for students who just need help with like understanding a test, or they just have a couple questions. And then we have check-ins that are only 15 minutes. If students just actually want to have, like a staff member that they can talk to about their progress, sometimes it helps to have someone to check in with. So I allow students to schedule that. Once you've selected one of these, you get a screen that's like this, and the dates where you can book things are highlighted in blue. So you can click on these, right, just like this, and it'll show you what these slots are. And then you can pick a time slot based on when people are available and go ahead and book it. Now, once you select one of these, you can go to this screen. It'll ask you to fill in your information, right? And basically, this is information that we will get so we can get in contact with you. You'll get a confirmation email letting you know that you've signed up for tutoring, and then we'll reach out to you at the time that you've scheduled. And that's about it for tutoring. So now that we've finished this preliminary information here, we're going to go a little bit more in depth to the actual tutorials, what's in them, and a little explanation, extra information about the mastery test. So we're opening up the tutorial. This is the very first one for Culinary Arts A. And we're just using this class as an example of the things that you can do in your lesson and what the lessons look like. Now, I want to start by showing you what some of the slides look like for a class like this. If you're a new student, if you've never seen these before, this will give you a little preview. It starts off with an objective. It always tells you what the goal for what you're going to learn is. Usually for electives, you'll have this sort of table of contents, and it'll start you off with a little introduction video. This is at the beginning of every single lesson for almost all of our courses. And then you start with a slide. Most of the slides look like this. Sometimes they have headers or titles, but for electives, you almost always get a slide in the very beginning that explains in detail, here are the topics that are going to be covered by this lesson. And that's what this slide is. In this lesson, and then it'll give you a description. And sometimes if there's extra information, you'll have a second paragraph here that says something like, in addition. So they're basically saying, also, here's other things we're going to discuss in the lesson. Let's see. I want to find a slide with a title. Most of our slides look like this. Sometimes there's a helpful photo, a chart, or a vocabulary list, something like that on the side. But your average slide looks like this. It has a title, and then there's paragraphs that have the information that you want in there. I'm going to move on to try to give you a preview of some of the questions or lesson activities. Let's see. Alrighty, so we get questions. Some of them are multiple choice, but the big ones are these lesson activities here. So we have the history of culinary arts in a state. So usually these lesson activities will have a header that'll tell you the topic, and it's made up of directions. It'll ask you a question. Sometimes there are multi-part questions in these lessons, and there will be like a part A, part B, and a part C. Usually these will ask you to answer questions or come up with ideas or thoughts about something that was on the previous slides. And you can actually go back and forth through the slides if you need a refresher on what you're being asked to describe or answer questions about. So you're not just stuck here on this slide with nowhere else to go. If you need to review the information, you can go back. Now, the important thing to note is that when you're completing a lesson for the very first time, very first time, you cannot scroll forward through the lessons without actually loading each slide. You can't skip around. So if you have not opened the lesson before, you can't, for example, skip over to slide 24. If you're on 13 doing this lesson activity, you have to complete it to be able to move on. You have to actually put something in these boxes and hit submit, and then it'll allow you to move on to the next slide. If you have completed a lesson before, it saves your answers from the previous time that you finished it, and you can hop around to different topics, say if you need to fill in something you're missing from your notes. So this is most of just a preview of what the lessons are like. This is another example. This has a couple different bullets. They use a lot of bold type. They use italics to let you know that things are important. And you're supposed to be reading these and taking notes on them so that you know what it is that you may be asked questions on. So for example, this is culinary arts that has to do with cooking. So this lesson is talking about people who developed the art of cooking over time. And that's information you might want to put in your notes. If they're giving you something specific like names, dates, locations, or if they're explaining why something is important, probably want to put that in your notes. If you're having trouble with knowing what to put in your notes, you can talk to your advocate, your teacher, or your mentor, or schedule tutoring. So now that we have an idea of what the slides look like, I'm going to handle this column over here because this has some very helpful tools. Now, this first one up here is the table of contents. If you are a student who's doing this for the first time, like I said, you cannot skip ahead. So these are going to be grayed out for you if you haven't already made it there. But if you're going through a lesson to like go back and take notes or review information, you'll be able to click on these sections and hop around to see what's there, right? Just like I'm clicking here now, it'll be able to click on it just like this. So that's the table of contents. This next section here is resources. So the resources sometimes have guided notes. This is not a class that has guided notes, unfortunately, but it does have a glossary. So this glossary here, let me click on it. This is a list of all of the words that are going to be shown to you throughout the entire class. This looks long, it looks overwhelming, but this is for the whole class, not just for this one lesson. So the first maybe like 5 or 6 words are going to come from maybe one of the first or the second lessons. And then there's going to be a couple sections here that come from like unit 2. So try not to be overwhelmed by this. Part of the reason why the glossary is here is so that students who maybe like lose track of where they came across a word can just have them all in one place if they need a definition real quick. Okay, so now we're moving to the dictionary. The dictionary allows you to look up a word. So we can type in pretty much any word here. So if we look up historical and hit enter, it'll give you the definition. This is just a digital dictionary. So if you're on a slide and you see a word that you don't know, you can look up pretty much any word that you have here. So if you wanted to look up the word contributions, you could copy it, put it in here, and get the definition. It's the act of contributing, a sum or thing contributed. So this is to, keep you in the lesson so you don't have to scramble and open a new tab to use Google or anything like that to look up anything. You can use this tool right here. The next section here for resources are the reading tools. And I think that these are really great. These are some of the best tools that we have for these classes. So there is a function here in Edmentum where you can actually have the slides read to you. So here's the slide narration. If you turn it on, it will automatically start reading the slide while you're going through them. The click to speak, when you have it on, it will allow you to click sections to read, right? And it highlights it exactly like that. And so you're able to toggle it on and off for sections that you need to read. This is really great for auditory learners, people who need, to hear things to process the information, because not everyone learns by writing things down. So we have that there to accommodate you guys. Here we have a translator. I don't really think you'll need this for very much of the electives, but you do have a couple that address words from different languages. So you can use this drop down to pick what language you want to translate from if you come up with a word that's a bit difficult to translate. Here we happen to have a French word here. Oh, I meant to turn that off. So if I copy this title of the book in French, La Viandier, I can go down to French because the lesson said here that this was the first cookery book in French. We can try to copy and paste it here and see if it'll translate it. I believe that this is because this is a book title, it's not an actual word. So it makes sense that there was no like actual translation here. But if I were to put another word in French here, like I'm just one off the top of my head, manteau basically means coat. Oh, you know what? This is actually translating to a language. So if I put coat here, it should actually give me the word I was looking for. Yeah, manteau. So this is translating to a language. And then we have the highlighter here. Now, the way that I use the highlighter and the way I tell students to use the highlighter is basically use it while you're reading through to figure out what you want to take notes on. A good idea for how to take notes, just to go over it really quickly, is to read the slide once so that you know what the information is they're trying to tell you. Then read it again and highlight what it is that you want to put in your notes, and then actually write it down. So for me, I'd have a page like just to sort of give you an example. I would highlight maybe things that seem important. So we've got this guy who made the first cookery book in France. He was a cook to the court of France, so that tells you how important he is. We have this other person, Martino de Rubis, and he also contributed a lot. Usually you'll get tested on names and things like that on the mastery test. And for dates, usually I'll highlight those in a different color. So I'll do it like this. And that way, when I go back over the slide, I can focus my eyes on exactly what I think I need to write down so I don't end up having to read the paragraphs a third time while taking notes. You read it the first time to get information. You read it the second time to decide, here are the parts I want to put into my notes. And then you can go over just those sections. I do want to note that the highlighter only lasts on the page that you're on. So if you go to another slide and then come back, the highlights are gone, which is why I think the highlights are mostly useful for figuring out what you want to put in your notes after you've read it and you understand what it's trying to tell you. And that's basically what the anatomy of a tutorial is. So we're going to close this out. We're going to go back here. The mastery test. I don't want to open it up because I'm not going to give you, like a preview of the questions. But the mastery test is a 5-question quiz that asks information or about information that you got in the tutorial. In the electives especially, there are a lot of fill-in-the-blank answers. There's some multiple choice and choose the right passage type of questions in there. But there's a lot of fill in the blanks, which is why notes are very important for the electives. Important things to note about the mastery test. If you don't do well on the mastery test the first time you take it, you are allowed to retake the test. To retake a mastery test, you have to go through the tutorial from start to finish, so from slide 1 all the way to the end where it says you have completed this tutorial. If you don't go all the way to the end, it will not reset the test for you automatically, and you'll still be locked out of it. Normally, the tests lock after you attempt it. Other important things, the grade book will keep your highest score. So if you manage to get a 100% on a test, that will overwrite whatever your previous grade was. But say, for example, you scored at 80% on your test. You got 4 out of 5 questions right, because all these tests are 5 questions. And you try to go back to make that a 100 because you really want to try to get a 100 on this test. If you take the test again, say you open it up and then your internet goes out, right? You don't get to turn in any questions. Technically, you scored a 0 because you didn't answer the questions. The grade book will still keep the 80% from before because that was your highest grade. So when you're retaking tests to try to raise your grade or show that you have a better understanding of the material, do not freak out if you don't do as well the second time or the third time as you did with any other time. You are not risking your grade by taking the test over. If you score higher, it will overwrite your grade. If you do not score higher for any reason, if you get logged out, if your internet conks out, if you lose power at home, like sometimes things happen. The grade book will keep your highest grade. Now, scrolling down, we have the post test. Now, the post test is just a big mastery test, basically. It's usually going to have between 4 and 5 questions for each lesson. So there are 3 tutorials in Unit 1 here. So this post test is going to be somewhere between 12 and 15 questions. And the other units work like that as well. So now we get to the midpoint check-in. I mentioned this before, but the midpoint check-in is just going to be a conversation with your advocate, your mentor, or teacher, where they ask you about what you've learned so far in the course, and for you to just prove that you've actually been going through the assignments. Now, once you get to the end, you submit your notes here. You're going to be able to upload photos of your notes. If you are in one of the rare electives where you have guided notes, you can also upload those. Down here, we have a discussion-based assessment. This is basically the big boy version of the check-in. If you click on the discussion-based assessment, what you're going to get is 3 questions about information you should know from going through the course. So for example, since we're using Culinary Arts A as our example class, this first one is discuss the restaurants in your city or town. What are popular? Is there international influence? Are there foreign foods that have very popular restaurants in the area you live in? You should be able to have a conversation about that based on what you've learned in this class and use information that you've learned to help you with your answer. And the other 2 questions are the same way. You basically want to think about answering these questions with the information you've learned from going through the class. We do tell you these questions in advance. This is not a teacher view or anything like that. This is what you get to see. So we show you the questions in advance. You are allowed to go back and refresh yourself on the answers. We're not just expecting you to come in blind going into the discussion-based assessment. When you're done with all your units and you've turned in your notes, you can actually go back into the lessons and figure out what things you want to include in your answer. This is like an open note sort of discussion. Down here, we have a chart that tells you what we're looking for when you're answering these questions. So the types of responses we want, information that proves you understand information that's happened in your class. You're not just talking off the top and saying things that are not in the class at all. And you're actually having a discussion with your mentor, teacher, or advocate. That's mostly what we're looking for. And we have this here so that you have an idea of what grade you'll get based on how you answer. This pretty much gives you everything that you need to be able to answer things well and for you to get full scores based on what you know, remember, and have studied. Alrighty. After that, we have a study guide. These study guides basically give you an outline of the types of questions that you're going to get on the final. It's not the questions themselves, but it tells you what the topics are, and it tells you what lessons you could actually find this information in. So for example, here we have various parts of a blade. So there is a lesson called Fruits and Vegetables that give you a little diagram of like a knife, and it shows you what the different parts are called, and and what you do with them to keep it maintained, keep the knife in good condition. If you do not have this section in your notes before you take the final, by seeing it on the study guide, you will want to say, oh, maybe I should go back and copy that down or draw out that chart. That's what this is here for. So you can use this as a guide for how to fill in your notes if you get to the class and you look at some of these things and you're like, oh man, I don't know how to separate spices into hot and cold. Let me go back and look at that. That's what this is for. And then we have the end of semester test. The end of semester test is basically a big version of the post test. There are 2 or 3 questions from every single assignment. And that means that the end of semester test for culinary arts is going to be pretty big and beefy because there's 5 units here. So usually the end of semester test is anywhere between 25 and 40 questions, depending on how long the class is. The longer the class is, the longer the final is. And that actually is about it for electives. So let me go ahead and stop sharing. Alrighty. That was an overview of the elective courses, the things that are in them, and what you need to look out for. Please take time to look through all of the items on your own to make sure that you're understanding things, that you know where to go if you need help. And just make sure that you are taking your time with these classes. I tell students this all the time. The elective classes have a lot of information packed into a small space. So you're going to want to take your time going through that. Make sure you're taking your notes. Make sure you're taking your time reading. These are not classes that you would want to dally and delay in, right? You want to tackle them ASAP so you can get through them as easily and closely as possible. If you end up needing any help, click on that tutoring information document and go for booking a tutoring session. We're here to help you. Alrighty, this was Miss Amber, tutor for MVA and Step Up, and good luck with your elective course. Hopefully you have everything you need to get through it, and have a great day.